Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Jeff Wallace for round two. Last time I had him on, we did a nice AI debate. That was pretty one-sided, both very much pro AI. He's the co-founder of Silicon Valley in Your Pocket. He's also founding investor managing partner and startup mentor at The Battery, president and founder at Global Kinetics, limited partner at some other companies, adjunct professor at UC Berkeley. In a couple of lines, Jeff helps startup founders globally boost investor readiness through coaching and programs. He's also a keynote speaker and, like I said, an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley Extension. So, yeah, Jeff, glad to have you on for round two. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you've been up to nowadays.
Yeah, so all those things you just said are true. They're all related, right? I work extensively and pretty much full-time supporting startup founders. That's my objective. I was a serial founder for the majority of my career. I had some good outcomes. If financial is the metric, and I've had some bad outcomes. I've learned a lot in all of my experiences. And for the last little over a decade now, full-time, all I do is work with startup founders. And we've been fortunate in our programs to work with across over 40 countries to date. So we've had a wide footprint of opportunity to expand and meet, incredibly creative and innovative founders everywhere.
Right. And if I remember well, that one of your first company was Pelican Partner, and you had a project in the Sea of Cortez, a real estate project down in Mexico, right?
That's right. That was actually after the internet bubble burst in 99 into 2000. I went to visit a colleague. He ultimately became a business partner. He was a very well-to-do, very successful entrepreneur himself, having very little education, actually, in terms of formal education. He had reached 7th grade. So, so much for, having to go through and get advanced degrees. This gentleman, for family reasons and, personal circumstances, wasn't able to go beyond 7th grade, but he was very, very successful in the insurance industry. And I went to visit him, and after the bubble burst, and I had to close my tech company. And ultimately, I became a partner with him in a business where we were building real estate down in Mexico, and never had any visions of doing that, but turned out to be a very interesting business and a very successful business. We built a very high-end luxury beach resort and over 220 properties, and commercial and residential. And it was just kind of an amazing opportunistic situation in my career, which has kind of been the definition of my career. It's been very opportunistic. Things fall into place, and I kind of am able to pursue opportunities that I wasn't necessarily planning for.
Right. And you exited that real estate company, went to work at Create Data, and it would be a couple of years since you would start your next business, Vivido Labs, right?
Yeah, Vivido Labs was a enterprise mobility business that was started with myself and two other gentlemen, one of whom was the former president of SAP America. So also very strong credentials in the enterprise space, enterprise software space. This was in the early days of mobility entering the enterprise world, when smart devices, I'll call it smart mobile. There's always been around, there's long been mobility, but we're really in the era of smart mobility since the iPhone and Android phones kind of came into being. Vivido was building mobile solutions for large enterprise, and ultimately, I ended up leaving that business. My partner went back to the SAP world. I went on to start and manage Cognizant's mobility practice. It's a large systems integrator. And that gave me a really good opportunity. Again, very opportunistic, but it gave me a good chance to get on the speaking circuit and talking about these kinds of technologies and the implications they have for corporate worlds. And it gave me a great platform to build a little bit of recognition for what I was espousing, the views I was espousing in that world.
And why alternate between entrepreneurship and corporations? Aren't they both not compatible?
Yes, and there's not too much alternating. Cognizant was a 2-year stint in what was otherwise a 20-year entrepreneurial journey. And what happened was it felt very intrapreneurial to me. The one challenge, of course, every startup has is lack of resources. And here we were, a little bit under-resourced in our own enterprise. And as I said, my colleague went back into the SAP world, and we were under-resourced to really pursue the initiatives we wanted to. And Cognizant came along and said, hey, we like what you're talking about in mobility, and we'd like to start a mobility division. And we need somebody, to take the lead. And would you be interested? And so it felt like an opportunity to have all the resources of a massive company. I mean, Cognizant at that time had 240,000 roughly people. I mean, it was a big multi-billion-dollar annual revenue kind of company. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I get to do what I want to do in mobility, but do it under the umbrella of a company that can provide all the resources. And for a couple of years, it worked. It worked quite well. I enjoyed it. We built a tens of millions of dollars. I think we were up to about an $80 million annual run rate of business. It was predominantly a services business. There wasn't as much innovation and creativity as I wished. And I had a change of boss, which is often a trigger for people to step out. And I took the opportunity to step out and get back, into entrepreneurial worlds.
Right. And I see you have various advisor roles even nowadays. I think that started around the same time you started investing, which is in 2015. So what was the inflection point there? Why did you started advising and investing?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's an expression: if you want an investment, ask for advice, right? Because if you get an advisor and they get to know you and they like what you're doing, they might become an investor. And so in 2015, when I really decided just my full-time effort is going to be supporting startup founders, I had co-founded The Battery at that time with numerous other angel investors. So all of us were essentially investors in the angel context. And myself and one other gentleman were leading the helm at The Battery and kind of co-leading the organization. And ultimately, I just started meeting lots and lots of founders. And before making investments, I decided, it would be good if we worked together. And so the role of advisor kind of became the easy opportunity. Let's work together. I'll give you advice. I'll be a sounding board, for your thoughts. And then ultimately, if all goes well and I like what you're doing and you like me, then there's a chance I could become an investor, which has happened on numerous occasions where I started as an advisor, got to know the founder, they got to know me. We all felt like the honeymoon period was continuing. We actually did really like one another and saw value in the relationship. And so I became an investor in many companies through that role.
And starting so many companies, advising so many, investing so many, what did you learn in terms of what makes a great founder and what makes product market fit?
It's interesting. That's always still the challenge, is finding that product market fit. But what I learned about certain characteristics of founders, for me at least, really work well. And I emphasize the plurality of the word founders. I don't use founder in the singular because I think a single founder has a lot of challenges raising investment. They may be amazing, but it's very, very rare that a single founder can take on all aspects of the business and not have somebody to kind of co-lead, or as I like to say, it's like a relay race. You have to have somebody who you can hand the baton to and run the next lap if need be. And so, certainly having a co-founder that is balancing in your skill sets is really, really critical. And I'd say the most critical thing for me is just coachability. I just want a founder that realizes and is humble enough to say, yeah, I don't know it all. I know a lot of things, but I don't know everything. And I'd love some support. And, to work with founders that are open to having those kinds of brainstorming sessions and open to the ideas that others and external perspectives can offer, I think is really, really critical. You're not going to find product market fit if you don't have that kind of flexibility in your thinking process.
Yeah, for sure. And do you have a recipe for product market fit itself? Have you found some specific niches, some specific growth hacks or approach that may get someone to product market fit quicker?
Yeah, it's probably going to sound really boring to someone like yourself who works with so many founders and talks about these topics all the time. But, truth be told, I would say in my experience, and we're talking thousands and thousands of companies over, 40 plus countries, as I said, over 10 plus years. So lots of experience working with founders. The thing that has really become very clear to me is about 75 to 80% of founders just simply don't do enough customer discovery. So kind of the blocking and tackling, the very basics. Get out there, survey customers that your target customers, understand their needs, understand if it's a need versus a want. People will fulfill a need. They won't always fulfill a want. So do more customer discovery. And we helped, almost all of the companies we work with. We can't overstate the importance of doing more and more customer discovery, constantly keeping a finger on the pulse of the market. And then once you get customers, which is a great achievement in and of itself, you found product market fit, you get customers buying or using your solution. Then you have to switch the focus for that particular group to retention. How do you maintain providing value to them over time? I always say, if you sell me something once, you're a good salesperson. If you sell it to me twice, you're delivering me value. And so, there's a real trick. Once you get customers, you've then got to, don't rest on your laurels. You have to now think about, how do I retain them and continue providing them ongoing value so they'll stay customers. It's much easier to keep a customer than to go find the opportunity to purchase, if you will, acquire another customer.
And you need to raise capital if you're building the product/value first way and not the sales way first?
That's interesting, because we get asked all the time, why am I not able to raise capital? And the most frequent answer founders in really any category you're going to get when you're trying to raise capital is, that sounds interesting, come back when you have more traction. So we have an expression: stop asking for investment and start asking for traction. Right? If you end up showing up at an investor discussion and you have all the right kinds of traction, the investment conversations go so much easier, and they're so much smoother, and they're much more productive. Productive meaning you're going to have a higher likelihood of getting an investment. So for us, it's really about traction, focusing on traction. Now, traction, to be clear, doesn't only mean revenue. Revenue is certainly a great proxy for traction. If people are coming out of pocket and spending resources on you, you're delivering value to them, right? And that's certainly traction. Excuse me. But the reality is, there's so many other proxies for traction. So focusing on traction, to me, is much more important. And the last point I'll make on this, we emphasize this to founders all the time. If you told me you raised $1 million of investor capital, I would congratulate you on adding $1 million valuation to your business. Pre-money plus money equals post-money. So it's a very straightforward 1x multiplier. If, however, you told me I've gotten, $1 million in revenue in my business, and it was, let's say, a SaaS type business or something with a reasonable multiplier, I'd congratulate you on adding between $5 and $40 million of valuation. Revenue brings multiples to valuation conversations, whereas investor capital doesn't. So the reality is, if you can find a way through growth hacks or other mechanisms, just guerrilla approaches to getting to early revenue, delivering value, focusing on retention, you will have a much more successful business. You'll have to eat, macaroni and cheese and hot dogs for a little longer because you don't have that capital to spend. But if you're struggling to get the capital, don't get depressed. Hunker down and focus on traction, and that will ultimately beget, investment in the future.
So you went through the dot-com boom, but decided to start a pet business 20 years later, Well-Groomed Pets. Tell me a bit more about that one.
Yeah, so Well-Groomed was an interesting one. It was a partner of mine from the 90s. We've known each other for many, many years. We were business partners in the late 90s in some of our startups. And his dog, years later, his dog had died at a very young age. I think his dog was around 8 years old. And of course, as you might imagine, the family was very upset and disappointed and frustrated, hurt. And so he called me up and he said, I just don't understand it. And I said, what happened? He said, it died of cancer. They found a tumor, but the tumor was like late stage cancer. And he said, I just don't understand why nobody saw it before. And I said, well, didn't you take it to the vet? He goes, yeah, I took it to the vet like 1.5 years ago when it needed to go to the vet. And he said, but you know what? I take it to my groomer. Every 5 weeks, I take my dog in for grooming. He said, I don't know why they didn't notice it. So he went and he talked to the groomer and he said, hey, what's the deal? Why didn't you guys notice this? It was kind of a lump and whatever. And they said, the short answer, to be crass, was basically, dude, we cut hair. That's what we do, And he said, this is crazy. These guys see the dog and handle the dog more than anybody other than the family themselves. And the family isn't trained to look for that stuff, but certainly groomers should be. And so the initial idea of Well-Groomed was to do groomer training. And then ultimately what we realized was we have an opportunity to establish a brand in this very fragmented dog grooming market. And it's a huge market, actually, a massive market. And so we launched a first store, Well-Groomed Pets, in Las Vegas was our first shop, our first salon. And now we've sold about 110 properties, salons, around dozen plus states across the country. And it's a great franchise business. We really focus on the wellness of animals, and our secret sauce is capturing wellness data on every dog that comes through every store and has an appointment. We're capturing over 50 some odd points of wellness data. And so we're accumulating a pretty massive and proprietary data set of canine wellness that just doesn't exist outside of what we're capturing.
Interesting. And you have so many businesses. I would guess are on autopilot. What does a day-to-day in your life looks like?
My day to day is a combination of running our curriculum at the Battery, which is a pragmatic AI, is the name of our program. And so we're helping founders understand how to sort through the noise of AI. There's lots and lots of noise in AI. So we're trying to help them understand how do they really leverage the tools that are out here in a sustainable and leverageable fashion where they can really add value to their business using AI in the right fashion. And then the rest of my day is talking to the founders that I'm involved with, the individual founders like Well Groomed, some of the other investments that I have, the other founders that I advise. So it's just a scattering of calls with founders and Zoom calls like that, like we're doing sitting here, with various founders across the different businesses that I'm involved in, and the curriculum for the formal programming.
How do you use AI in both your business and personal life nowadays? And what models do you use?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of an early adopter, so I test a lot of the various AI tools that I come across. There are far too many for me to be testing all of them, but I test all the big ones, of course, the Claudes, the ChatGPTs, the Geminis. There's a couple of other solutions I really like using. One of them is called you.com, like me and you, you.com. It's a great one because it incorporates all of the major LLMs. So there's probably about 20 different LLMs that you can use. So you can run a prompt and then test how does it run in, ChatGPT 4.5 or versus Claude 3.7 versus Grok versus, all the different LLMs. So it's really an interesting one. We use AI literally, I'd say every single day we're using AI to help with all sorts of aspects of our business, either marketing, helping write copy, helping do research. It's amazing, these days, if you want to create a PowerPoint presentation for something, you could drop into the Microsoft platform, go into the 365, like the PowerPoint 365. You could just say, I need a presentation that covers these topics. And boom, within 60 seconds, you have a beautifully graphic and spaced out PowerPoint kind of presentation. So we use it for all sorts of those things. And of course, we're using it in our own program on pragmatic AI. We leverage massive amounts of AI and workflow automation, which is kind of related, to make our business substantially more efficient. We can run our business now with just a small single-digit number of people, where it would have required, a couple dozen people probably in the years past. So we're definitely leveraging AI for all that it can bring. And I'm sure we're only scratching the surface ourselves. As advanced as I think we probably are as a team, I'm certain there's much more that we will be stumbling into over the years to come.
And how do you build your content and your ideas and your insights with AIs nowadays?
So yeah, a lot of prompting. What we have learned in AI, and I don't think it's any secret, is that the better the prompting, the better the output, right? So kind of a garbage in, garbage out. If you ask really simple questions of AI, you'll probably get very simplistic answers. But if you can get very detailed and very specific in your prompting, I've got one prompt, for example. The prompt itself is, I think, 18 or 19 pages. But the output is phenomenal, and it's taking up hours of what would have been hours of workflow, and it's just doing it in seconds, basically by creating really, really robust prompts and refining them continually. I feel like a sculptor who's constantly refining and smoothing edges on a sculpture they're creating. That's the way we treat our prompting. We're constantly refining and smoothing elements of our prompting. And of course, as these LLMs change every minute, every day, they're always changing. And so you constantly have to keep refining and learning how to adapt into the new functionality that these various tools bring us. So yeah, we use it for copywriting. Like I said, we use it for presentation development. We use it for advanced research these days. You always have to be careful of what's real and what's not real with AI, but we do like using some of the sourcing AI tools like Perplexity that provides the sources of where it identified the information it's bringing you. That's another one we use extensively in addition to the various LLMs is Perplexity. So yeah, that's just a handful of our uses. But I would say I almost don't even want to think back to days before AI because it's so much easier with these various AI tools at our disposal now.
Yeah, I fully agree. Have you been vibe coding yourself as of late, like using Lovable or Replit or Bolt.new to build apps from scratch?
I'm not a coder, so I don't think necessarily extensively in those terms. I have not used Lovable. I have played a little bit with Replit. One of the automation tools we're using is a tool called N8N, if you're familiar with it. So we'll use N8N and then we'll drop into one of the LLMs, because a lot of the N8N stuff ends up being JSON files. And again, as a non-coder, that would have been out of my reach, prior to these LLMs being here. But now I can go in and just describe in business logic or just logic exactly what I'm looking for these automation tools to do for me. And I can say, here's what I'm trying to do. Please produce me a JSON file that enables that. And then I can copy that into N8N and boom, I have workflow automation. So it's pretty astounding for a non-coder to be able to actually write code. And I've got other non-coding friends who've taken screenshots of websites that used to do something for them, and maybe they went away, and they've just been able to take screenshots and rebuild from scratch. Again, as non-coders, completely rebuild applications. Mostly web applications are the ones I'm thinking of. But yeah, I know of tools like Lovable and Replit. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. And even as we're getting into some of the like the agentic AI stuff, it just totally fascinates me. And I continue to play in my spare time as if I have so much of that.
What are your top goals for this year? What do you want to achieve?
Our goals are, we're regrowing the battery. So the battery's been around for a decade, but last year we relaunched it under the umbrella of this AI and our program, the Pragmatic AI program. So, my goal this year is to continue exploring opportunities to help founders leverage AI, which puts an onus on us to constantly stay on top of what, the various AI tools that are out here are. So continuing to learn and continuing to help support founders to leverage these tools, because we know founders are basically like one-armed jugglers, right? They're just busy as all heck. And our ability to help net out what's useful for them and how they can best deploy the tools that are available and cut through all the noise. Again, AI to me is a lot of noise right now. As everybody comes out with the next best tool, we have to figure out what's real and what's not real. So staying on top of that is almost a full-time job in and of itself. And I don't even want to pretend I am on top of it. We're as on top of it as we can be, given our other obligations. But that's our goal, is to continue learning about these AI tools and helping founders deploy them appropriately for their businesses.
Love it, Jeff. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, listen, our two main programs are Silicon Valley in Your Pocket, and that's a .com. You can go siliconvalleyinyourpocket.com. We do shorten it to SVIYP.com, so you don't have to type as long a name. Or thebattery.com is our other accelerator program focused on the pragmatic AI. So I encourage people to look on those websites and also reach me on LinkedIn. I am not a big social media guy, but I'm a big LinkedIn guy. And I always encourage people to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I think you'd have no trouble finding me. Just type Jeff Wallace and either Silicon Valley or Battery, and I'll pop up.
That was Jeff Wallace and Charles Cormier for